In the heart of the African savanna, far from the bustling cities and prying eyes, lies the secluded village of Kayembe. Surrounded by an endless expanse of golden grasslands and ancient baobab trees, the village appears serene during the day. But as the sun dips toward the horizon, a palpable tension grits the air. Here, every man, woman, and child abides by an unyielding rule. No one may step outside their home after sunset. The reason for this peculiar tradition is whispered behind closed doors, wrapped in fear and secrecy. Yet, the weight of this rule looms over the village like a shadow, too heavy to escape. One evening, the rule is put to the test. A young boy, Bahati, sprints desperately along the narrow dirt paths of Kayembe, his small frame trembling with exhaustion and fear. His bare feet slap against the dry, cracked earth, leaving faint imprints that will vanish with the morning dew. The sun hangs low in the sky, its fading orange light stretching the shadows of the thatched roofs into long, menacing shapes. Behind Bahati, faint whispers seem to emerge from the surrounding darkness, growing louder with each passing moment. They do not sound like the voices of his people, but something altogether unnatural, low and guttural, as if the wind itself carries a warning. Bahati clutches a small wooden charm around his neck, a talisman his grandmother gave him when he was just a baby. "This will protect you," she had said, but in this moment, Bahati questions its power. His breath comes in ragged gasps as he pushes himself harder, glancing back only once. What he sees freezes him in place for a fleeting second. Shifting shapes, almost human, but not quite, moving in and out of the shadows. Panic surges through his veins, and he forces his legs to keep moving. The warmth of the day is quickly being replaced by the icy chill of dusk, and with it, an oppressive silence settles over the village. Bahati's home comes into view, the small hut's doorway glowing faintly from the oil lamp inside. His grandmother, Kido, stands at the threshold, her weathered face etched with worry. "Bahati, hurry," she shouts, her voice trembling. Bahati's heart pounds as he lunges into the hut, just as the last sliver of sunlight dips below the horizon. Kido slams the wooden door shut and secures it with an iron latch. The whispers outside vanish as quickly as they came, leaving only an eerie stillness. For a moment, neither of them speaks, the weight of what almost happened pressing down on them. That evening, the village elder, Ajani, calls a gathering. His voice, deep and commanding, resonates through the packed room. "The darkness is not ours," he says, his piercing gaze sweeping over the crowd. "It belongs to them. It does not need to elaborate. Everyone knows who they are. The stories of the Nyama Wamwezi, the shadow dwellers, are as old as the village itself." Ajani continues, his tone grave. "Long ago, our ancestors made a mistake. They sought power that did not belong to them, and in doing so, they bound this village to a curse. The night is their domain, and to trespass it is to invite their wrath." His words send a shiver through Bahati, but unlike the others, his fear is mixed with something else, curiosity. As the villagers whisper among themselves, Bahati's mind races with questions. Why had no one ever tried to break the curse? Was there truly no way to reclaim the night? His grandmother seems to sense his thoughts and grips his arm tightly. "Do not even think about it," she whispers. "This is not a story for you to unravel. Respect the rules, Bahati. They are all that keep us safe." But Bahati cannot silence the growing defiance in his heart. As the evening stretches on, he sits by the small fire in their hut, staring into the flickering flames. He recalls the whispers from earlier and the shifting shapes in the darkness. Were they truly creatures of myth? Or was there something more to this tale? He knows that asking such questions is dangerous, but the seed of doubt has been planted. For Bahati, the rule feels less like protection and more like a prison. Yet, deep within him, he feels the pull of something greater, a need to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. As the village settles into an uneasy silence that night, Bahati lies awake, his thoughts restless. Outside, the darkness presses against the walls of the hut, alive with unspoken secrets. His grandmother's steady breathing is a reminder of the life he has always known, safe within the confines of the rules. But Bahati cannot ignore the quiet voice inside him. urging him to look beyond the boundaries of his world. And as he drifts into a restless sleep, one thought lingers. What if the darkness is not what it seems? Bahati sat cross-legged on the floor of his grandmother Keto's hut, the faint glow of the fire reflecting in his wide, curious eyes. The smell of burning herbs mixed with the earthy scent of clay walls, but his mind was elsewhere. Since the near miss with the setting sun, a restless energy had taken hold of him, refusing to let go. His grandmother's voice echoed in his memory, recounting the tales of the Nyama Wamwezi, shadowy creatures born from darkness, their forms shifting and insubstantial. They haunted the edges of the night, punishing those who dared to defy the sacred rule. Yet, despite the vivid details of her stories, Bahati felt a growing skepticism. Could the fear gripping the villagers be based on little more than superstition? He turned the wooden charm in his hand, its surface smooth from years of being clutched in moments of fear. His grandmother often said it was a shield against the unknown, but it felt fragile in his palm, powerless against his mounting questions. He thought of the shadows he had seen, the strange whispers that had seemed to follow him. Were they real, or had his own fear conjured them? The question gnawed at him, refusing to be silenced. His gaze shifted to the door, beyond which lay the answers he sought. But Bahati knew he could not face the night alone. The next morning, as the sun rose over the savannah, bathing the village in warm light, Bahati sought out Ayo, his closest friend. Ayo was perched on a wooden stool outside his family's hut, weaving strips of dried grass into a mat. His hands worked quickly, but his eyes carried the same cautious fear that seemed to linger in every villager's gaze. Bahati approached him, his voice low but insistent. Ayo, don't you ever wonder about the stories? About why we're trapped like this? Ayo looked up, his expression a mix of surprise and unease. Trapped? Bahati, it's not a trap, it's protection. You saw what happened last night. Do you really want to risk that again? His words were sharp, but his tone wavered, betraying the uncertainty beneath. Bahati crouched beside him, his voice dropping to a whisper. What if it's not real? What if the fear we carry is what gives them power? Think about it, Ayo. We live our lives running from shadows. Don't you want to know the truth? There was a fire in Bahati's eyes, a determination that made Ayo hesitate. He looked down at his hands, now motionless on the half-finished mat, and then back at Bahati. And if it is real? Ayo asked, his voice barely audible. What if the truth is worse than the stories? Bahati leaned in closer, his tone urgent. Then at least we'll know. We can't keep living like this, hiding behind rules we don't understand. The silence that followed was heavy, punctuated only by the distant sounds of goats bleating and children's laughter. Finally, Ayo sighed and nodded. Fine, but if we're doing this, we need to be smart. No one can know. That night, as the village prepared for another sunset, Bahati and Ayo slipped away, their movements careful and deliberate. Their destination was the abandoned hut on the outskirts of Kayembe, a place spoken of in hushed tones. It was said to have once belonged to a healer, a man who dabbled in forbidden knowledge and vanished mysteriously. Some believed he had angered the Nyama Wamwezi, while others claimed he had become one of them. Whatever the truth, the hut now stood as a silent witness to the village's past, its walls covered in strange symbols that no one dared to interpret. The boys approached the hut cautiously, the air growing colder as the sun dipped lower. The structure loomed before them, its thatched roof sagging and its wooden beams warped with age. The faint scent of decay lingered, mingling with the dry, dusty air. Bahati pushed the door open slowly, its hinges creaking in protest. Inside, the hut was dark and cluttered, filled with the remnants of a life long abandoned. Shelves lined with jars of dried herbs, an overturned stool, and a woven mat covered in strange carvings spoke of a man who had once called this place home. Bahati's eyes were drawn to the carvings on the walls, intricate patterns that seemed to pulse with an energy of their own. He traced one with his finger, its edges rough and uneven. These symbols, they're different from anything I've seen, he murmured. Ayo, standing by the door, shifted nervously. Bahati, we shouldn't be here. This place feels wrong. But Bahati ignored him, his focus locked on the symbols. These must mean something. Maybe they're warnings, Or maybe they're instructions. What if this is how we break the curse? His voice was filled with a mix of fear and excitement, a dangerous combination. Ao hesitated, his instincts screaming at him to leave, but his loyalty to Bahati kept him rooted to the spot. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared, a chill swept through the hut, extinguishing the small lantern they had brought with them. The sudden darkness was oppressive, pressing against their skin like a physical weight. Bahati and Ao froze, their breath shallow and quick. Somewhere outside, the whispers began again, faint but unmistakable. They were not alone. The sun hung low on the horizon, its dying light bathing the savannah in hues of amber and crimson. Bahati and Ao stood at the edge of their village, their torches flickering weakly against the encroaching twilight. The pungent smell of animal fat mixed with the dryness of burning would fill the air. The silence was unnerving. The usual symphony of crickets and frogs had vanished, replaced by an oppressive stillness that seemed to hum with an unseen tension. Every instinct screamed at them to turn back, but Bahati's resolve was unshaken. He tightened his grip on the makeshift torch and took the first step onto the forbidden path. Each step felt heavier than the last as they moved further from the safety of their village. The soft dirt path wound its way through the tall grass, where the shadows seemed to ripple unnaturally, as if alive. Ao's eyes darted nervously, scanning their surroundings for any sign of movement. His voice, usually steady and calm, was tight with unease. Bahati, this is madness. If anyone finds out, we'll be punished or worse. He glanced at his friend, hoping for reassurance, but Bahati's expression was unreadable, an intense mixture of fear and determination. Ao, we need to know, Bahati said quietly, his voice firm. Living in fear of something we don't understand, that's no life at all. The hut came into view just as the last rays of sunlight slipped below the horizon. It was smaller than they had imagined, its roof sagging under the weight of time. The walls were darkened with age and weather, and strange symbols were carved into the wooden planks, their patterns twisting in ways that seemed to defy logic. Bahati's pulse quickened as he stepped closer, holding his torch high to illuminate the carvings. They were unlike anything he had ever seen, intricate and chaotic, as if created by a hand guided by desperation or madness. These look like wards, Bahati murmured, running his fingers over the grooves. To keep something out or in? Ao lingered by the doorway, his unease growing with every passing moment. Bahati, this place doesn't feel right. We should leave. Now. His voice was tinged with a fear he could no longer hide. But Bahati ignored him, his curiosity overriding his caution. He crouched near the base of the wall, where more carvings were etched into the dirt floor, forming a strange, incomplete circle. The air around them felt heavier, thicker, as if the hut itself was alive and watching. Suddenly, a sharp breeze swept through, extinguishing their torches in an instant. Darkness enveloped them, thick and suffocating. Ao let out a strangled cry, his voice barely audible over the pounding of their hearts. Bahati, he hissed, his hands fumbling to relight the torch. The flint sparked weakly, casting brief, fleeting light, but in those moments of illumination, they saw something that made their blood run cold. Shadows that moved, not with the flickering light, but against it, creeping closer, silent and deliberate. A low growl emerged from the darkness, resonating deep in their chests. It was not the growl of an animal, but something far more menacing, a sound that carried an unnatural weight. Ao grabbed Bahati's arm, his grip tight and trembling. We have to go back now, he whispered urgently, his voice cracking under the strain of his fear. Bahati hesitated, torn between the primal urge to flee and the burning need to uncover the truth. His chest rose and fell with shallow breaths as he stared into the shadows, trying to make sense of what he was seeing or not seeing. Before he could answer, the growl grew louder, joined by a faint whispering that seemed to come from all around them. The words were unintelligible, but the tone was unmistakably threatening. Ao pulled harder, his panic spilling over. Bahati, I'm begging you, whatever you're looking for isn't worth this. His voice cracked with desperation, and for a moment, Bahati faltered. The whispers grew louder, and the air around them seemed to vibrate, heavy with an unseen presence. Yet, amidst the fear, Bahati's resolve burned brighter. "No," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "We're too close. This place is connected to them. If we leave now, we'll never know." His words carried a weight that even he didn't fully understand. He broke free from Ao's grip and stepped further into the hut, his movements slow but deliberate. Each step felt like crossing an invisible threshold, the air growing colder, the whispers louder. Ao hesitated, torn between loyalty and self-preservation. His instincts screamed at him to run, but the thought of leaving Bahati behind was unbearable. "You're gonna get us killed," he muttered, following reluctantly. The growling ceased abruptly, replaced by an unsettling silence. The absence of sound was deafening, pressing against their ears like a scream held just out of reach. Then, as if in answer to their unspoken fear, the floor beneath them began to tremble. It was faint at first, but quickly grew stronger, the dirt shifting as if something beneath them was trying to break free. Ao froze, his eyes wide with terror. "Bahati, what did you do?" he whispered. But Bahati had no answer. His gaze was locked on the symbols around them, their edges glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. Whatever they had disturbed, it was awake now, and it was watching. The boys stumbled into the village, their breaths ragged and their legs trembling from the harrowing escape. The weight of the darkness seemed to cling to them, as if the shadows themselves had followed them home. Bahati clutched his torch, now extinguished, while Ao's eyes darted nervously, scanning the paths for any lingering threats. The once familiar streets of Kambi felt foreign, each hut a looming silhouette against the faint moonlight. The villagers were nowhere to be seen, their doors tightly shut, their windows dark. Only one figure stood waiting for them, Ajani, the village elder. His tall frame was illuminated by the weak glow of an oil lamp, and his expression was a mixture of anger and deep sorrow. Ajani's voice cut through the silence, low and steady, yet laced with an edge that sent a chill through the boys. "What have you done?" he asked, his words more accusation than question. Bahati, still catching his breath, tried to speak, but the elder raised a hand to silence him. "You ventured where you were warned never to go, and now they are awake." His words hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. Ao stepped forward, his voice shaking. "We didn't mean to, nothing happened, I swear." But Ajani's piercing gaze silenced him, and the elder gestured for them to follow. The three entered Ajani's hut, a small space filled with the scent of burning sage and adorned with relics of the past, carved masks, woven tapestries, and ancient scrolls. Ajani sank into a wooden chair, his shoulders slumping as though carrying a great weight. For a long moment, he said nothing, staring into the flickering flame of the lamp. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with sorrow. "You two are too young to know the truth," he began, his tone measured but grave. "But now you must understand, the shadows you encountered are the Nyama Wamwezi, and they are bound to this village by a curse that stretches back generations." Bahati leaned forward, his curiosity battling with the lingering fear from their encounter. "What curse?" he asked, his voice steadier than he expected. Ajani's gaze met his, and in that moment, the elder's age seemed to double, his eyes filled with memories of pain and regret. "Centuries ago," he said, "our ancestors were not content with what they had. They sought power, wealth, and knowledge from forces they did not understand. They performed forbidden rituals, summoning the Nyama Wamwezi to grant their desires. But the beings they summoned were not benevolent. They came with a price too great to bear." The elder's voice faltered, and for a moment, the only sound was the crackling of the fire. Then he continued, his words slow and deliberate. "The Nyama Wamwezi do not take gold or livestock as payment. They feed on fear, on the terror that grips the heart when darkness falls. Our ancestors tried to send them away, but it was too late. The creatures were bound to this place, and to ensure their survival, they cursed our village to fear the night forever. That fear is their sustenance, and so long as it exists, they will remain." Ao's face had gone pale, his earlier bravado now replaced with a deep unease. "But we didn't do anything to them," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Ajani's expression hardened. You ventured into their domain, disturbed the balance that keeps them at bay. By stepping into that hut, you reminded them of the power they once held. You've awakened them. Bahati's mind raced, replaying the events of the night. The carvings, the whispers, the glowing symbols. Is there no way to stop them? He asked, desperation creeping into his voice. Ajani sighed deeply, his hands trembling as he reached for a small, weathered scroll. He unrolled it slowly, revealing faded symbols and drawings. At its center was an image of a figure standing against a swarm of shadows. There is a way, he said, his voice barely audible, but it comes at a great cost. The prophecy tells of one who will face the Nyama Wamwezi and end their reign. This person will not only need great courage, but must also be willing to sacrifice everything. The room fell silent, the weight of Ajani's words pressing down on the boys like an invisible force. Ao shook his head, his voice trembling. Sacrifice everything? What does that mean? Their life? Ajani did not answer directly, instead looking to Bahati, whose face was a mixture of fear and determination. The prophecy is vague, but one thing is certain, Ajani said. The one who fulfills it will not return unchanged. Bahati's hands clenched into fists, his mind a storm of emotions. The fear he had felt in the hut was still fresh, but alongside it burned a need to do something, to break free from the grip of the darkness that had ruled their lives for generations. Ao placed a hand on his friend's shoulder, his voice low but firm. Bahati, this isn't our fight. Let the elders handle it. But Bahati shook his head, his voice steady. If not us, then who? The curse has lasted long enough. Someone has to end it. Ajani studied him for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he rose from his chair and placed a hand on Bahati's shoulder. You are brave, boy, he said softly, but bravery alone will not save you. His words were both a warning and a blessing, and as the fire flickered, casting their shadows on the walls, Bahati felt the weight of his decision settling on his shoulders. The air in the hut grew heavy, filled with unspoken truths and the distant whispers of the Nyama Wamwezi, waiting in the darkness. The night descended upon Kambi with a suffocating stillness, the air heavy and cold. Inside his grandmother's hut, Bahati prepared for what he knew would be his final act of defiance against the shadows that had plagued his people for centuries. The smell of burning herbs filled the room as he ground the sacred leaves into a fine powder, following the markings he had memorized from the carvings in the abandoned hut. Each movement was deliberate, his hand steady despite the storm raging within him. Ajani's voice echoed in his mind, warning him of the dangers, but Bahati pushed it aside. His grandmother's words, spoken long ago, anchored him. True strength lies in sacrifice. As the village fell into an uneasy silence, Bahati stepped into the night. The darkness felt alive, pressing against his skin as if testing his resolve. In his hands, he carried a bundle of dried branches bound with strips of cloth soaked in animal fat. Strapped to his back was a pouch filled with the sacred herbs, their earthy scent sharp and invigorating. He moved with purpose toward the clearing beyond the village, where the ground was bare and the sky stretched wide. It was a place of vulnerability, open to the gaze of the Nyama Wamwezi. That was why he had chosen it. The clearing was eerily quiet, the usual rustling of leaves and distant calls of nocturnal animals absent. Bahati worked quickly, arranging the branches into a crude circle and sprinkling the herbs in precise patterns. The carvings had been clear. Fire and the sacred powder would weaken the shadows, forcing them to manifest. His heart pounded as he struck the flint, the sparks catching on the cloth. Flames roared to life, casting flickering light across the clearing. He stood at the center, clutching the wooden charm his grandmother had given him, its surface worn smooth from years of use. The silence broke suddenly with a deep, resonant growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The shadows at the edge of the clearing began to shift, riding like living smoke. Shapes emerged, twisted, humanoid forms with elongated limbs and eyes that glowed faintly, like embers in the dark. Their voices came next, guttural and layered, each word reverberating in Bahati's chest. What do you call us, child of KMB? Do you seek to bargain or to beg? Bahati's grip on the charm tightened, but he refused to show fear. "I came to end this," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. The shadows laughed, a sound that was both mocking and chilling. "And there is no end, only the balance we maintain. You have no power here, only fear to offer us." Drawing a deep breath, Bahati reached into his pouch and cast a handful of the sacred powder into the flames. The fire flared brighter, its light pushing the shadows back slightly. The Nyama Wamwezi hissed, their forms momentarily flickering. "You think you understand the old ways," one of them growled, stepping closer. Its form was barely distinguishable, but its presence was overwhelming, pressing against Bahati's very soul. "You carry the courage of a fool. What will you sacrifice to protect your village? Your freedom? Your life? Speak, and we shall see if your resolve is as strong as you believe." The words struck Bahati like a blow, forcing him to confront the weight of his decision. He thought of his grandmother, her hands trembling as she told him the stories of their ancestors' greed. He thought of Ao, his friend's fearful eyes begging him to turn back. And he thought of the children of KMB, growing up with the same fear that had chained their people for generations. The shadows were right. His resolve would be tested, but he would not falter. "Take me," Bahati said, his voice clear and unwavering. "Bind me to you, but leave my people in peace. Let them walk the night without fear. Let them live free." The Nyama Wamwezi paused, their shifting forms stilling as if considering his words. The largest of them stepped closer, its eyes blazing. "You would tether your soul to ours? You would give yourself willingly to the darkness, knowing you will never return?" Bahati nodded, his heart pounding. "If that's what it takes to end this curse, then yes, I'll give you what you want." The shadows moved as one, swirling around him in a vortex of cold and whispers. Their voices rose in a chant, incomprehensible yet resonant, shaking the ground beneath him. The flames around him dimmed, their light swallowed by the encroaching darkness. In the midst of the chaos, Bahati felt a strange calm. He clutched the charm one last time, its familiar weight grounding him. His grandmother's voice echoed in his mind once more. True strength lies in sacrifice. As the shadows closed in, he whispered a prayer, not for himself, but for the village he was leaving behind. The last thing he saw before the darkness consumed him was the faint glow of the flames, a symbol of hope that would burn long after he was gone. The first light of dawn crept over the savannah, golden rays piercing the heavy darkness that had long clung to KMB. The village stirred to life, but something was different this morning. The oppressive weight that had held its people captive for generations was gone, replaced by an almost sacred stillness. As the villagers emerged from their homes, they hesitated, their steps tentative, as if testing the boundaries of a world that no longer held them in fear. The night shadows had receded, leaving only the faint hum of the wind and the distant calls of awakening birds. Ajani stood at the center of the village, his eyes scanning the horizon with a mixture of relief and apprehension. The elder's presence was a constant source of strength, yet his expression carried the weight of unspoken loss. One by one, the villagers gathered around him, their faces reflecting the same cautious hope. It was then that Kido, Bahati's grandmother, stepped forward. Her weathered hands clutched her walking stick tightly, her gaze fixed on Ajani. "Where is he?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Ajani's silence was deafening. He lowered his head, unable to meet her eyes, and instead gestured toward the abandoned hut at the village's edge. The villagers followed his lead, their steps heavy with dread and curiosity. The hut, once a place of fear and mystery, now stood as a silent witness to the events of the night. Its walls, darkened by time and weather, bore a single new carving. The image was unmistakable, a young boy, his silhouette standing defiantly against a swirl of shadows. His hand was outstretched, a faint line connecting him to the darkness he faced. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and Kido sank to her knees, tears streaming down her face. She reached out to trace the carving, her fingers trembling as they brushed over the lines. "Bahati," she whispered, her voice breaking. The villagers stood in solemn silence, their fear of the unknown replaced by an overwhelming sense of gratitude and sorrow. The Johnny stepped forward, his voice firm but filled with emotion. Bahati's name will be remembered, not for his defiance, but for his courage. He gave everything so that we could be free. The days that followed were a time of quiet reflection. The villagers worked together to rebuild their lives, unburdened by the fear that had once defined them. They walked the paths at dusk without hesitation, marveling at the freedom they had long been denied. The children, who had never known life without the curse, played beneath the stars, their laughter filling the night air. Yet, despite the newfound peace, the memory of Bahati lingered, woven into the fabric of the village's story. In the evenings, Kito would sit by the fire, her hands clutching the wooden charm Bahati had once carried. She would tell his story to the children, her voice steady and strong. She spoke not of the fear he had faced, but of the love that had driven him to act, the love for his people, for their future. The children listened with wide eyes, their imaginations painting vivid pictures of the boy who had dared to stand against the shadows. And as the flames flickered, casting long shadows on the walls, whispers of Bahati's name seemed to dance in the wind, carried to every corner of the village. Ajani too found himself changed by the events. The elder, once a figure of authority and tradition, now carried a deep respect for the courage of the younger generation. He spent his days teaching the villagers the lessons learned from the curse, ensuring that the greed and recklessness of the past would never be repeated. The carting in the hut became a place of quiet reflection, a symbol of the sacrifice that had freed them. Visitors would leave offerings of flowers and small tokens, their gestures a silent tribute to the boy who had given everything. But even in the midst of peace, the villagers could not forget the cost of their freedom. In the quiet moments of dusk, as the first stars appeared in the sky, the wind would carry faint whispers, soft, fleeting sounds that seemed to echo Bahati's name. Some said it was the voice of the Nyama Wamwizi, bound forever to the boy who had challenged them. Others believed it was Bahati himself, watching over the village he had saved. Whatever the truth, the whispers were a reminder of the courage it takes to face the unknown, and the strength it takes to sacrifice for those you love. This is the story of how one boy's bravery illuminated even the darkest of nights. A story passed down through generations as a testament to the power of courage and the unyielding light of hope. If you enjoyed this video, please help us grow by subscribing to this humble channel. And if you'd like to watch more videos like this, we prepared the next video especially for you. Click here to watch.